turkey had been in the oven since 7 that morning, and the whole house smelled the way Thanksgiving is supposed to smell. Sage and butter and something warm that doesn't have a name but feels like safety. I was standing at the kitchen counter, slicing the cranberry loaf my wife used to make every year. She passed 4 years ago, and I keep making it. I don't know if I do it for me or for her, or just because stopping would mean something I'm not ready to admit. My daughter had arrived around noon with her husband and my granddaughter. The three of them came through the front door in a rush of cold air and grocery bags and noise, the way families do when they haven't seen each other in a few weeks. My granddaughter ran straight to me and buried her face in my sweater. She was 9 years old and still did that, and I hoped she would keep doing it for as long as she wanted. Her name is Mackey, and she is the reason I am still standing in this house today. My son-in-law set his bag down near the coat closet and said he needed to check on something in his car. That was the first time. I didn't think much of it then. He was always forgetting something: his phone, his sunglasses, his wallet. I had known him for 11 years, and I still couldn't tell you what he did for work without pausing to remember. Something in finance, something that had been going less well lately. Though my daughter never said that directly. She said things like, "We're being more careful right now, and it's just a transition period." I had learned not to push. We sat down to eat around 2 in the afternoon. The table was full in the way that makes a house feel real. My neighbor Ida had brought over a sweet potato casserole the day before, and I put it out like I'd made it myself. Nobody needed to know. My daughter had done the green beans. Maki had insisted on making the place cards herself, carefully printing each name in red crayon, mine the largest of all. I said grace the way I always do, short and direct, thanking God for the food and the people and for 1 more year. My son-in-law bowed his head, but I noticed his eyes were open, looking at his phone under the table. I let it go. Halfway through the meal, he excused himself again. Said he had to make a work call. On Thanksgiving. I looked at my daughter, and she looked at her green beans. Macy watched him go down the hallway toward the study. She watched the way children watch things, completely, without trying to seem like they're not watching. I asked her if she wanted more cranberry sauce, and she said yes, but she kept her eyes on the hallway for another few seconds before she turned back to me. We finished dinner. We did the dishes. My son-in-law came back to the table and was louder than before, more cheerful in that specific way people get when they're pushing something down. He talked about football, and about a restaurant he wanted to try in the city, and about how Masi was doing in school, asking her questions without really listening to the answers. I know that mode. I've been in that mode. Something was working in him beneath the surface, and he needed the noise to cover it. After dinner, Masi helped me carry the leftover turkey to the fridge. She was quiet while we wrapped things in foil. Then she said, not looking at me, "Grandpa, what's a deed?" I stopped. "Where did you hear that word?" She shrugged in the way that means she knew exactly where she heard it. "Daddy was on the phone," she said, "when he went to your study. I walked by and the door wasn't all the way closed." I kept my voice steady. "What did he say about a deed?" She turned to look at me then, and her face was serious in a way that 9-year-old faces shouldn't have to be. "He said something about your deed and a signature, and that it would be easier if you didn't." She stopped. "He said something about it being easier if you weren't around to ask questions." The kitchen was very quiet. Did he say who he was talking to? She shook her head. Then she reached out and held my wrist with both of her small hands and said, "Grandpa, I don't think it was about work." I told her she did the right thing, telling me. I told her everything was fine. I told her to go watch TV with her mother while I finished up in the kitchen. Then I stood at the sink for a long moment with the water running, staring at the drain. My wife and I bought this house in 1987. We paid it off in 2003. I have the deed in a fireproof lockbox in the closet of my study, the same room my son-in-law had just spent 20 minutes in with the door almost, but not quite closed. I dried my hands on the dish towel. I walked down the hallway and into the study, and I opened the lockbox. Everything looked the same. The deed was there. My will was there. The small blue folder where I keep the account information for my brokerage account was there. But there was something else in the folder that I did not put there. A single sheet of paper, folded in thirds. The kind of paper that comes from a printer at a copy shop or a law office. I unfolded it. It was a quitclaim deed, already filled out, my name and the grantor line. The grantee line had a name I didn't recognize, a limited liability company with a generic name, 3 words that meant nothing. There was a signature line at the bottom, blank, waiting. And next to the signature line, someone had placed a sticky note with my son-in-law's handwriting. It said, "Thursday if possible," before he asked questions. I sat down in my desk chair because I needed to. I want to be clear about something. I am not a dramatic man. I am 71 years old. I worked 34 years as a civil engineer. I coached Little League for 12 years. I built a deck onto the back of this house with my own hands. I do not panic. But sitting in that chair, holding that paper, I felt something cold move through me that I had never felt before. Not even when the doctor told me about my wife's diagnosis. Not even on the day she died. Because that was grief, and grief I understood. This was something else. This was betrayal with a plan. I put the paper back in the folder exactly as I found it. I closed the lockbox. I went back to the living room where my daughter was watching football, and my son-in-law was laughing at something on his phone, and Macy was sitting in the armchair with a book, glancing up at me when I walked in. I looked at her. She looked at me. I gave her one small nod so she would know I had found something. She looked back at her book. I sat down on the couch and watched 12 minutes of football. I don't remember it all. That night after they left, I called my brother. He's 74 and he practiced real estate law for 30 years before he retired. I told him what I found and I described the document as precisely as I could. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Don't touch anything. Don't say anything to your daughter yet. I'll be there tomorrow morning." He was at my door at 8:15. He looked at the document for about 90 seconds. Then he set it down on the desk and looked at me over his glasses and said, "This is fraud. Whoever prepared this intended for you to sign it, willingly or otherwise, and transfer the title of this house to a shell company." He paused. "Do you know if your son-in-law has a financial problem?" I told him what I knew and what I suspected. He nodded slowly. "The LLC on this document, I'd want to look at the filing, but my guess is he controls it directly or through someone else. If he would sign this, or if somehow a signature was obtained without your full understanding, you'd have transferred this house and had no legal recourse." I asked him what "without your full understanding" meant. He said, "There are cases where elderly homeowners are told they're signing a refinance document or a tax form. Sometimes things are slipped into a stack of papers. Sometimes—" He stopped. "This is a criminal matter. This isn't just civil fraud." We spent that morning on the phone with an attorney, a different one. Someone who handles elder financial exploitation specifically. She was precise and thorough, and she asked hard questions without flinching, and I answered everyone. By afternoon, we had filed a report with the county sheriff's office and submitted documentation to the state attorney general's elder abuse unit. I have to tell you about the part I keep coming back to. 2 days later, my daughter called me. She was crying before I could say anything past hello. She said she had found documents at home, printed emails, what looked like research into my finances, notes about the house. She said she had found a folder with my name on it that her husband had hidden in the back of the filing cabinet. She said she did not know. She said it over and over, her voice breaking apart each time. I believe her. I believe her because I know my daughter, because the person who did this was careful not to let anyone close know the whole shape of what he was doing. She said he had gambling debts, not small ones. He owed people, a private lender first, then worse when he couldn't pay the private lender, and the debts had compounded for 2 years, while she thought they were just being careful. The house, my house, was going to be sold through the shell company, and the proceeds used to settle what he owed. He needed the sale to close quickly and quietly. He needed me not to ask questions. He had been watching the timing, waiting for a moment when I was distracted, when papers might be in front of me without full context. Thanksgiving had been chosen because families sign things sometimes during visits, insurance forms, holiday cards, notarized documents pulled out between the pie and the coffee. He was going to try on Thursday, the day after. One day. That was how close it was. My son-in-law was arrested on a Tuesday morning in early December. I was not there for it. I didn't want to be. There were 2 charges: attempted real estate fraud and financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, which is how the law categorizes what happens when someone targets a person over 65. He was arraigned and released on bond. The case is still moving through the system, slowly, the way these things do. My daughter filed for divorce 2 weeks after the arrest. She and Masi are staying in an apartment on the other side of town. She calls me most mornings now, early, before Masi goes to school. Some of those conversations are hard and some of them are quiet and almost ordinary, and I am grateful for all of them. I went to my brother's house for Christmas. We sat at his kitchen table and ate the same meal we'd been eating on Christmas for 40 years and didn't talk much about any of it. Didn't need to. He just said at one point quietly, "Good thing Marcy has your wife's instincts," and I had to look away for a minute. She did. She absolutely did. People have asked me since then, friends, neighbors, once a man at my church who heard about it secondhand, whether I felt angry, whether I wanted to confront my son-in-law, wanted to say something to his face, wanted some version of justice that happened in a room with the 2 of us in it. And honestly, no, I don't need that. What I feel isn't anger, not really. What I feel is something harder to name. A kind of grief again, different from the grief of losing my wife, but from the same family of feelings. It is the grief of realizing that someone sat at your Thanksgiving table, ate your food, said grace with their eyes open, and was already thinking about how to take everything you had left. That is its own kind of loss. It does not go away quickly. But here is what I want to say, and I mean this directly. My granddaughter walked past a half-open door. She heard something that didn't sound right, and instead of deciding it was none of her business, instead of telling herself she'd misheard, or that adults knew best, or that it would be awkward to say anything, she came to the kitchen, and she held my wrist, and she told me. She is 9 years old. She saved this house. She saved me from something I don't like to think about too long, what it would have meant to find out later, after a signature had already been notarized, after a deed had already transferred, after the damage was done, and the legal window for undoing it had passed. I have not and will not miss a chance to tell her that. The lockbox is still in the closet. The house is still mine. And on Sunday mornings now, Mossy and her mother come over and I make my wife's cranberry loaf, and Mossy sits at the counter and asks me questions while I cook. The same counter where she told me something wasn't right about a work call on Thanksgiving afternoon. I always answer her questions. Every single one. Because a child who knows they'll be heard will keep coming to you, and I need her to keep coming to me. That is the only thing I know for certain now. Listen, when the children speak, they see more than we give them credit for, and they are braver than we deserve. I've thought about the timing more times than I can count. One day, that's what my brother said when he put the paper down on my desk. If Mackie hadn't walked past that door, if she had decided it wasn't her place, if she had talked herself into thinking she must have misheard, I would have lost this house. Not through bad luck, not through a market crash or a medical bill, or any of the ordinary ways a person can lose what they've spent a lifetime building. I would have lost it because someone who sat at my table year after year had decided my trust was something to be used. That is still hard to hold. I don't think it gets easier, exactly. I think you just learn to carry it differently. What I keep coming back to is this. Nothing that happened was random. Douglas made choices, a long chain of them, each one smaller than the last until the whole thing felt normal to him. The debt, the silence, the plan, the document in my lockbox waiting for my signature. That's how it works. It doesn't start with fraud. It starts with one decision that gets easier to make the next time, and easier still the time after that, until a man can sit at a Thanksgiving table and say grace with his eyes open and feel nothing about it. The choices made him. By the end, he wasn't hiding who he was from me. He had already hidden it from himself. And Maki. I think about what it took for her to come to the kitchen and say what she said. She's 9. She knew on some level that what she was doing had weight. That telling me might change things between her mother and her father. Children understand more than we let ourselves believe, and the ones who speak anyway, the the ones who push past the discomfort of not knowing what comes next. Those children have something that can't be taught directly. It has to be built, slowly, through years of being heard when they speak and told the truth when they ask and trusted with information that matters. She came to me because she had always been able to come to me. That didn't happen by accident either. I'm not a man who spends much time on regret, but I do wonder sometimes what I missed over the years. Signs, I explained away. Tension, I thought was stress. The way Douglas laughed a little too hard at certain moments and went quiet at others. I don't know that I could have seen it sooner, but I know now that paying attention is not passive. It takes something from you. It takes the willingness to sit with what you notice instead of immediately making it comfortable. What saved me was not luck, and it was not my own cleverness. It was a 9-year-old girl who had the moral clarity to know that wrong was wrong, the presence of mind to hold on to what she heard and bring it to someone who could act on it, and the courage to do something uncomfortable because it was the right thing to do. Those three things together, knowing right from wrong, thinking clearly under pressure, and acting anyway when it costs you something. I've lived 71 years, and I still can't tell you anything more important than that. The house is still mine. Macy makes her place cards in red crayon every year, and I answer every question she asks no matter what.